Okay, just to let everybody know, this will be recorded and we'll make it available. Thanks everybody for joining the second LOOR webinar. It's going to be discussing recommended sailing inventory for Lake Ontario offshore sailing. The presentation will be done by Hugh Beaton of North Sails. Just to give you a couple of points, this is being recorded. So if you ask questions, that will be recorded as well. So your continued participation provides your approval for this. The ground rules will keep everybody muted until there's the time for the questions at the end. The process will be to raise your virtual Zoom hand, more on this a little later, and we'll recognize people in the turn that they raise their hand, and therefore move on to the question period. So this is how you can raise your virtual hand: is find the Zoom toolbar, find participation, and click on raise hand, and then we'll see that on the list of participants, and it's in order, and we'll call on you in order to unmute yourself and ask your questions, and then please mute yourself again when you're finished. We'll go through this in order. The toolbars may be slightly different on your machine. Anywhere you see 3 dots, there's some more commands for Zoom, so you may have to click on them to find your raise hand, but look for where it says raise hand. It may be in with the reactions, but that allows us to keep track and answer the questions in order. LOOR just runs the number of offshore races on Lake Ontario, and that's for more information where you can contact us. We have another upcoming webinar in March, which will explain for people who haven't got a perf certificate what they need to do, especially if it's a new boat on Lake Ontario. I'd like to thank Hugh for joining this session. He has sailed in lasers and 420s and small keelboats. He's been involved in sailing since 1999 and is highly involved in the 8-meter class and has sailed in 21 world championships, winning 9 titles along the way. And he works for North Sails in Toronto. And I'm sure many of you have met him and have asked him questions about sailing and sails. So I'm going to now turn it over to Hugh so he can start his presentation.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Graham. I hope everybody can hear me. Very pleased to be here to present to the group. The distance racing has been an interest of mine for almost the entire 40 years that I've been sailing, and you know, it's been rewarding to learn about how to sail boats with few crew, and so whether it's 1, 2, or even an 8 on a boat while taking shifts, it's a very rewarding pastime for sure. So I'm here today to talk really about how you approach building an inventory of sails to achieve your objective. And primarily for this talk, I'll be just talking about preparing for Lake Ontario. If we were preparing to do the Transpac or the Sydney Hobart or something else, we would be considering different weather systems and different needs. But for this talk, it'll really be about preparing for distance racing on the Great Lakes and the impacts of fast moving weather systems and fronts, and how do you respond quickly and safely to changes. And so the first thing that I would recommend for anybody who is considering getting into distance racing and taking their existing platform is to just have a look at what sails you currently have. You can create your own little sail selection chart very easily and plug in what you have, figure out where you would use those sails, And then you're going to see some gaps and weaknesses where, if you start filling the holes one by one, you'll cover the entire range of conditions for wind speeds and wind angles. So some boats may just go to 4 sails and cover the bases, and others you can end up with 12 sails. It really depends how energetic you want to be and what your platform is. So a sail selection chart, you've probably seen these, they're on our website. And so they're sort of useful as a starting point. I would say right away that the one on the left and the one on the far right are really just examples of fully crewed inventories where people are out changing spinnakers, and they don't really apply for distance racing, especially with fewer crew. The one in the middle is perhaps a better starting point because we're trying to end up with fewer sails and cover a big range with those sails. And for the purposes of upwind, you can just take this kind of half circle graphic and you can draw in another line for 30 degrees apparent wind angle, which would be your upwind threshold. And then you could draw in your current headsail, whether it's one headsail or maybe you have 2, but that would be a great way to start in figuring out, do you actually have a downwind sail? Do you have a reaching sail? And do you have an upwind sail for when it gets windy? These are really the challenges for everybody. So here, let's touch on the science a little bit. So on a new build like this one here, this is a new 30-foot sport boat from FAR called an X2. And this boat hasn't been launched yet. It's the first boat is in production. The second boat is on order and will come to Ontario, which is exciting. But we look at this and as a starting point in the process, and this is the kind of project that we learn a lot from, that we then get to apply in all kinds of scenarios, including the ones on Lake Ontario. So we get a plan like this and a bunch of 3D information. And then there's a collaboration that starts off with the yacht designer, the builder, the spar manufacturer, and the sailmaker to really make sure we've got all the engineering right. And you have to know how fast the boat will travel so that you can design the sails correctly. And then you can decide which sail combinations will be used in various wind speed and wind angle situations. So as part of the pre-launch science, we end up with a sail selection chart like this. And across the top, we have true wind speed. And on the vertical axis, we have true wind angle. And so what we're trying to do here is lay out where the sails would get used and are we covering all of the conditions. So J1 is really your primary jib on this boat. And on this boat, the J1 has a reef. There's soft hanks on the luff. And so it's a horizontal reef. So you're going to lower the sail a meter or so and put in a reef. And there's a clever system of tidying up the fabric at the bottom. And so you see the yellow sliver is upwind sailing with the jib reefed. And then after that, the wind is increased to 23 knots. And now we're going to go to the J4. Now on this boat, going back one slide, we'll see that the J4 is actually this sail here, the red one. Or if I go over to the plan here, you'll see that there's the primary forestay, and here's the J4 on this inner stay. And so it's a furling sail, shorter hoist. And so that's the progression. We have the jib, then the jib gets reefed, then you go to the J4. So the J4 also doubles as a staysail, which is quite interesting because it gets used to slot inside, say, the Code Zero or the spinnakers. And so you end up with a multi-purpose sail that is not just a heavier number 4 jib that gets used once in a while. It's actually a sail that you use quite frequently. The other nice part about this chart is that it correctly shows the effectiveness of the Code Zero. It's a very useful product in distance racing. It covers quite a bit of ground. You're using it here in the very light. And then even as a power reacher later on here at 20 knots, you're ripping along with it. And then deep angle sailing is really these two spinnakers. We have a masthead A2 and then a fractional A5. These are both nylon spinnaker type products. And there's our inventory. Maybe it looks complicated, but actually for a 30-footer that's going to be double-handed or solo raced in ocean environments as well as lakes, this covers everything. And so this is an example of a really well laid out inventory plan that's trying to not have too many sails on board, but actually covers everything in a progression that makes sense. So from this kind of science, we get real life. So this is a Geno 3300 that would have gone through that exact design process. And now there's a whole bunch of them sailing around the world. So we've got a really nice looking J1 jib there with soft hanks. It could also be a furling sail, but in this scenario, it's got soft hanks. And this boat is ready to go anywhere, any race, double-handed. We also see the addition of the downwind options with staysails. So we have the Code Zero here on a furler, and then we have an inner staysail. And so again, this is all predicted in the design process and produces the results that are expected. So there's really no trial and error kind of work going on these days. You can really bank on what you're going to get. Another example of a design concept for offshore racing. This is a J121. Exactly the same process went through. It's a simple inventory for double-handed racing, or in this case, the whole family's out. But we have here furling Code Zero on the sprit. We have the furled jib that you can see here on the forestay. We have the furled J4 being used as a staysail inside it, and of course the mainsail. And there's two big reef points on the main. So that's a pretty typical inventory to try and cover everything that you need that is not too complicated to use. Locally, some of our local heroes here, but this was an inventory progression, let's say. The boat had a masthead Code Zero, and that was just too big to do some power reaching. So we added a fractional Code Zero. And so now this is a 40% smaller Code Zero and stronger, and can be used in quite a bit of breeze to get the boat really ripping. So getting started in loshers, or could also be for somebody doing their first Susan Hood or Lake Ontario 300. Somebody who's just getting into it, I'll start there. So let's say somebody's got a 35-year-old production boat. They got a mainsail and a roller furling Genoa. That's it. And they want to get out and test themselves and have a little fun. You can do it in a main and jib, but I think eventually somebody wants a little more speed and deal with the light stuff. So the first sail to get really would be an A2 asymmetric spinnaker. You may have to get a sprit to try and get it away from the pulpit. That would be the first choice. You've got to get something that you can reach with, and you can sail some downwind angles with more effectiveness. And then you got to look at your upwind. Do you have choices? What are you going to do when it's blowing 20 knots? So I put here A2 first, then let's talk about an inner jib. A new style cruiser might have a different scenario. So any of the newer style cruisers, typically have small jibs only. And so their need is different. They might need a furling code 0 as the first choice because the boat is starved for power and they really need something to get the boat going in light air. And the furling code 0 will give the boat the power it needs, even in a close angle, like 40 degrees apparent. And you can still sail deeper angles with it, offering a higher degree of performance than if you didn't have it. So I call that the first sail. Then maybe an A2. If you get the A2 first, you may still find the boat very frustrating in light air, trying to go upwind or on a close reach. So there's different needs. So there's a different starting point for everybody. And there's a different solution on how to get there. But luckily, there's been a lot of people before you. So I have here a case study. This is a CNC 35 Mark II. There's one I'm speaking with now that may be interested in upgrading and getting the boat ready. And so here's sort of a perfect inventory for a 40-year-old 35-footer like that. You need a mainsail with 2 reefs. You need a reliable luff track system. So plastic slides might work on some masts, but they're not great. They have a lot of friction. They can break when it's windy. I really think it's worth looking at luff systems, and they don't have to be expensive ball bearing systems. There's other choices. The Tide's Strong Track is maybe one of the best values in the marine sailing business right now, I think. So this boat needs a Genoa because it's an older design, has a small main. So you probably do need a 150 Genoa, but it should be reefable. You got to have that first gear change at your fingertips. And you're not going to go up there and take down a 150 and change jibs or any of those things. So I think you want a furling 150 that has the ability to reef. Eventually, a reefed headsail is not looking so good, probably around 18 to 20 knots true. And so that's when an inner jib really starts to make sense. These can be removable stays, and the sail could have hanks, or nowadays we're looking at a lot of free hoist furling sails. The technology for the sails, the technology for the cables, the technology for the furling gear are all getting so good that these are now options that we're looking at, whereas even 5 years ago, it was a Dyneema stay with a bunch of hanks. So there are choices, and they're all good choices, and they're different for every application. And then downwind, furling code 0 and an A2. That's like the perfect setup. The furling code 0 on this boat perhaps can be a little wide ranging, a little more of an A3-0 split, giving really great reaching in the whole range. Because the boat has a Genoa and maybe it doesn't need the code 0 to pretend it's an upwind sail. These are all choices. You work through them boat by boat, but I would say the furling code 0 is just a great value sail for almost anybody wanting to do distance racing on Lake Ontario. We get a lot of light air. We get a lot of cases where the wind dies. And sometimes the furling code 0 is the only sail that is going to pressurize and make the boat move. So that's one case study. So again, first sail for somebody who's just getting started, get a good reaching sail. So here's a picture of a great 40-year-old 36-footer, and full bat main, roller furling Genoa. First downwind sail would be a nylon A2, sort of like this thing. And they've used it here with a snuffer. Didn't want to use a sprit, so they got the tack on a tack line. It's up in the air away from the pulpit. It's a great way to go and do your first bunch of distance races. Factors in the decision-making, we always talk about sail handling. Is it going to be a snuffer? Is it going to be freely taken down by hand? Or is it going to be furling? And these are all things that have to be discussed. The attachments at the top and the bottom are critical about whether you can have furling or not. Crew agility is important. Are you going to go up on the foredeck, or would you rather not? People that don't want to go on the foredeck at all could have a furling sail that stays up, and that might require a little bit of engineering with a prod or something at the front. But there are ways to set your boat up where you don't even have to go on the foredeck at all. It's all possible these days. Descriptions of sails is certainly a hot topic these days. Handicap systems, perf, ORC, IRC, all these ones, they all tend to have different definitions of sails. And we get caught up in it all the time where people say they want a code 0. And so you really got to know, what does that mean? What are they going to use it for? It's really all about girth. So Genoas typically are a 50% mid-girth sail. G0s, or nowadays we might call it a code 65 or a code 55. And then the traditional code 0 from 10 years ago, we would now call a code 75, because that's the one that is 75% wide in the middle. We have G1 or an A1 asymmetric, they get wider. And then of course, a full A2 is usually almost as wide at the middle as it is at the foot. So there's the progression of girths. Really important when you're getting into racing, when you're going to apply for your perf certificate, is to know what you have, and then also know what you might want to buy, and make sure you tell your sailmaker that you want to go racing with it, because you want to make sure that you're getting a code 75, at least at this point. So again, just to reiterate, code 75 means it's 75% wide, 75% of the foot at the half height. So code 65s are great sails, fantastic. They're now permitted in ORC, IRC. They don't have to carry as much fabric out the leach. So you can see in this picture here that the leach of the sail is very tidy and clean. They furl beautifully, but unfortunately right now, as of today, this sail is not permitted in Perth Lake, Ontario. And I think we're all hoping that they're going to get to that point soon, because they really are beautiful sails, and a lot of cruisers have them. So in the hopes of increasing participation in sailing and fun races, I think we have to make provision to get these permitted in Perth. So upwind choices also factor in to getting people ready to go. And so, you know, the pictures here is our friend Charlie just out for a day sail, but I put them in here because they illustrate the progression of upwind sail changes. And so this would apply to almost everybody around here on the lakes as well. You have to have a progression, a plan. You're going to map out what you're going to do as the wind increases. So if you have a furling Genoa, probably going to reef at 20%. Then you're going to reef the main. Then you might set the inner jib, and then you might reef again. That'd be a progression as you get up into the higher wind speeds. And the inner jib, like I said earlier, it could be Hanks, could be free hoist furling, could be whatever. It's going to be different on every boat. We have to figure out how much space there is, what the mast can handle, what the deck can handle, and stuff like that. And it may not be for everybody, but I think these are choices. So you can see here with Charlie in the left picture, he has his full-size J1 and a full-size main. And then later on, actually not the same outing, but you can see that he's got the J1 furled, he's got the J2 deployed, and he has a reef in the main. So hard to say which one of these he's in more control, but that's actually how these guys go sailing. So good for them. If you have multiple jibs and you think you're going to use them, I urge you to practice a lot, because aside from safety issues, it's a pretty good way to get a bad result in a race. If the weather changes and you end up taking 15 to 20 minutes to do a sail change, and the boat suffers performance greatly during the whole thing, or you sail off course or whatever. So if you're going to think about changing jibs when the wind increases, you really got to practice. I put this slide in here. This is really sort of a great example of how fully crewed inventories are quite different than shorthanded. And so they both apply. And sometimes people, modify their boat to do some shorthanded sailing. So this is a friend of ours from Quebec. He's come to our lake a few times. He's also done the Bermuda race, I believe, 6 times. And so this is what a fully crewed inventory looks like on his boat. You got the mainsail with 2 reefs, J1, J2, J4, and a jib top all get hoisted up the tough luff or harken foil. He has a spinnaker staysail, a Genoa staysail, a furling code 0, an A3, both of which are set from the prod. And then he has 2 symmetric sails that he uses with a pole and storm sails. So he's got the whole gambit. And he would tell you that he's used all of them and combinations of them. And there isn't really anything there that he doesn't think is important to take on board. Now, if you took the same boat and you wanted to do the Loft series, you would have to make some choices. If it were me, I'd probably put the furler back on the forestay and have a J1 with vertical battens and reefing capability. And that'd be my first gear change. And then I'd probably want to get an inner J4 on a furler, sort of going back to that inventory we looked at on the far 30-footer, trying to keep it simple. And then you probably wouldn't necessarily carry, well, I wouldn't carry the symmetric sails at all. And then you've got a code 0 and an A3, probably want an A2, and you might need a longer prod because you're going to get rid of the spinnaker pole. So there's a couple of mods you'd make to it if you were going to take double-handed seriously or solo, but that would be the difference. A lot of sails with fully crew, and you try and have fewer with solo and double. It's another project. Some of you have heard me talk about it before. I'll just go over it quickly, but this was a boat that was being rebuilt, and they wanted to keep it simple. So we went with 4 sails only. And you can see here in the picture on the right, we've got a mainsail with 3 reefs, right? He's got a track system, a harken system on the mast. We've got a 135% furling Genoa that can be reefed. And we have a furling code 0, which is really an A0, A3 combo. It's big and powerful, and you can see it in the left picture there. It's a really great reaching sail. And then an A2 with a snuffer. So, the beauty of this simple setup is you got a 58-foot boat that could be sailed by 2 people. And I'm not sure you could do it without the headsail being furling and reefable. And I'm not sure you could do it without the code 0 also being on a furler. For fully crewed racing, they ended up wanting a code 60, more like a upwind or a large roach headsail for ORR. And, it's much flatter than this one you see in the picture. And it's really trying to be more of an upwind sail for, 5 knots of wind. And then they're looking at getting a symmetric spinnaker to help with deep downwind because the boat's fairly heavy and really suffers at deep angle downwind sailing. Those would be for fully crewed only. For double or less or offshore cruising for just 2 people, then that 3 sail inventory at the beginning is perfect. It's another nice example of what you can do with a modern inventory. And again, I present these really to get people thinking about their own project, not that you want to duplicate everything, but hopefully it gives you some ideas. And so this is a J99 with a very energetic solo application with somebody who's really getting into it. And so a couple of key points that we talk about all the time, and you've heard, and they're applicable to everything. 30-footer, 40-footer, 70-footer. You need a mainsail with a really good track system. and 2 reefs, and there's no magic about where the reefs go. You just need big enough ones that they make an impact. And sometimes for solo, people just get 1 reef and get a big one. I have another boat up in Lake Superior where, they're doing the Trans-Superior race, which is long, windy, cold, big waves. And so they're going to get 2 reefs, but the second one's going to be really big. And so there's no magic, it's all about trying to get the boat to balance and whether or not you've got crew or no crew, and whether the boat is tender or not. So again, these are talking points and things that can be customized for every application. So this boat has soft tanks. So we've got a light jib and a heavy jib and a jib top, all going to get hoisted with soft tanks. So that means going up on the foredeck, which means agility and some good safety practices of harnesses and clipping on, and really understanding your boat. So not for everybody, but for sure, very common. Even the guys in the open 60s are going up on the foredeck and climbing the mast and doing all kinds of things out in the ocean. So this boat has bottom-up Helix code 75 and top-down furling A2 and a top-down furling A3. All 3 of these are operating on the same Harken reflex unit with just interchangeable tack fittings. And then adding just recently now furling spinnaker staysail and Helix furling Genoa staysail. So you say, well, wow, there's a lot of combinations. What's going on here? Well, we'll just run through them quickly for everybody to know. So you got 2 close reaching sails, pretty important things on the Great Lakes for sure. We got a jib top. I've just picked numbers. I have 12 knots. It could be more or less, but I think 12 is probably about right for this boat. So above 12 knots, you're probably going to close reach with a jib top. And then below 12 knots, you're going to close reach with your Helix code 75. And, it's going to vary on shear and other things, but that's sort of a good crossover. You certainly can't close reach with a great big code 75 like this when it gets really windy. And, you just end up bearing off, and now your true wind angle is terrible. So if you want to stay on course and you want to keep sailing on a tight angle, the jib top can do that. Whereas the code 75 is just going to start pushing you away from your intended target. So both useful sails. Unfortunately, the jib top has to go up the same forestay as the jibs. So that is a sail change up on the deck. You got 2 spinnakers. Not every boat needs 2 spinnakers, but this is a good illustration of how they're different. They're both the same surface area, but the A2 clearly is the more powerful sail with a longer luff length and more forward projection. And the A3 is straighter luffed and designed a bit more for closer angles. So again, I just put these targets in here. Just for this example here in this slideshow, the actual transition zones may be different on this boat. And then the staysails, where do they fit in? Well, spinnaker staysail on the left and Genoa staysail on the right. And then they get slotted in between other sails. So this is a very common setup. You got the code 0 with the Genoa staysail. And then as the wind gets freer and a little more on the beam or slightly aft, then all of a sudden you got the spinnaker staysail inside the A3. In both cases, the staysails are contributing. They really are improving the overall flow through the sail plan and cleaning up the backside of the mainsails and reducing drag. And it's tangible. You really can feel the difference. So they're not just pretty sails anymore. They actually are pretty functional. And you'll see these modern setups with sometimes 3 headsails all nested in amongst each other, all trying to work together. It's pretty effective. So you heard a lot about furling. I think in almost every one of my examples, I'm talking about something on furling. And And these are not just headsail furlers. I'm talking about downwind furling choices. So there's a lot of gear out there and a lot of good gear. And this is just one example here. So don't think that I'm promoting just the Fachner here. But we'll start about talking about top-down furling. And just a quick refresher on what top-down is. The torque from the spool on the furling line is transferred all the way up to the top to get the top of the sail to start to furl first, right up at the upper swivel. So historically, that was a big, heavy cable, anti-torsion line or torque rope, or different names of it. And for spinnakers, that still is the case. You need this torsion line to start the twisting at the top, so the spinnaker will start to furl at the top and then gradually furl all the way down. And they do work. I'm not a suspect or a doubter anymore. I was never that convinced, say 5 or 6 years ago, but now I've seen them in action, and I think the gear is better. The sail designs are better. All the parts of the equipment are just better. And so I think it's now not something to be feared. You can now also get Helix Code 0 with a top-down furling option. This is a fairly new development where we're putting a fancy cable inside the luff of the Code 0 for load sharing with the small cable and the sail carrying load. And again, it's going to furl at the top first, so you get a tight furl at the top. And on big applications, that's pretty important, because the big applications might be traveling at higher speeds while they're trying to furl, and it bottom up may not get to the top soon enough, and now we've got something flapping around up at the top. So big sails, Code 0 should be top-down furling with a cable. And so there's the two choices for top-down. You do have to have a swivel. So this thing here that I'm circling, that's the tack swivel for this Fachner unit. You can see that this post here is going to fit right into the jaws with this removable clevis pin. And so this swivel is going to stay attached to the sail all the time. And that's just one piece of gear. This is the cable I was just mentioning that Future Fibers is North Sails or North Technology Group company. And so with North Sails, developed the Helix Luff cord. So that's the little one over here on the right. So these bigger, heavier cables that have been around for a while were not allowing for a proper Helix design because they were too heavy. And so now with the development of these much lighter, softer cables, we can do a top-down furling sail that is still the Helix concept with load sharing and the proper forward projection of the luff of the sail. And you do get the reliable tight furl at the top. I got a little visual here. Sorry, it's a bit grainy. It's a screen capture of a video, but it is showing how tight up here, how tight the furl is at the top. And so even a boat traveling at high speed can furl the thing up and not have anything flapping around. So there for sure is a point. We're still learning about where the crossover would be on luff length. And it might not be luff length, it could be luff length and speed that the boat travels at. It's another example of some good gear, and I bring this slide in here just so that everybody understands how important the gear is when they want to start moving into downwind furling. And so this is one example of a well-designed product. The power unit here, where the furling line works, is got a little channel, and all of these tack fittings slide in and lock. So there's a little pin here that holds these in place. So this is a tack swivel for something that's a cable. So if you had a Helix furling cable, it would come down to this clevis pin. These two eyes are for lashing the tack of the sail, and this is the swivel. It spins around. This is the standard Harkin fitting for their own cable that would go around here and be clamped up in here. This would be a bottom-up Code 0 furler that is not swiveling at all. You have different options for fittings on the bottom that screw in here, and a couple of different swivel options. So well-designed system, You can use it on a variety of sails, but it's so important that there's proper discussion about what further you're going to buy and how the sail is going to be designed and engineered. So good discussion up front. I really don't think it's a good idea for people to go out and try and buy the furler first and then try and buy the sail later. I think they really should happen at the same time. Bottom up furling. This is the more common setup for code zeros. And we probably have 50 or more of these on Lake Ontario right now. And they're all working just fine. So here's a tack of a 42 footer where they've actually managed to fit it inside the pulpit. There was just enough room in front of the forestay to put the drum right onto a reinforced anchor locker or anchor roller, I mean. So it's just one example, but you can see that the tack just goes straight into the clevis pin on the top of the spool. And it's a helix bottom up. So there's some lashing here to get the cable, or it's actually a small Dynex cord to share load with the luff of the sail. And that lashing can be adjusted over time as the sail ages and other things shrink and stretch and whatever. But the load sharing can always be adjusted with that lashing. So it's a simpler system for sure. You don't need a tack swivel on your furler. You don't need an expensive cable. And so for lofts under 18 meters, and maybe this number is going to change, maybe it's going to be 16 meters as the cables get better and lighter and cheaper. But I have no reservations at all about doing bottom up helix on almost all the boats here on the lake because it's been working fine to date. Here's a little video or a photo, sorry, of a normal modern cruiser with a little retractable bowsprit, and he's got a bottom up unit. I think that's a Carver. And so here they're ripping along in 4 knots of wind or something. And then, they have to furl. So, it's a simple process. Guy's pulling on the furling line. It's rolling up from the bottom. You can see here it's bottom up furling, so it gets real tight down low. And then a little looser up high. But again, it's very reliable. And if we go back to this guy here, they got this thing going really great here, but they do have a little power assist because they got the furling line hooked up here to 2 guys on a pedestal grinder. So they're able to get that in pretty quick. For most people, it's like this, one guy pulling on a line. So they both work, and they, one thing here, it's nice, you see the split pulpit. That makes access easy, makes retracting the gear easy. There's a lot of little things that can make your life easy if we think them through. This is a modern 46-foot cruiser, and this is the way a lot of boats are coming out of the factory these days. So they've got something nice at the front already figured out. They've already designed the boat, planning for the code zero, planning for an A2. So you can see here, I've zoomed in, it's all straight out of the factory. Furling headsail, code zero on a bridle so it can't twist, 2-to-1 for the A2. And you're going to see more and more of that as time goes on. Again, the split pulpit, pretty standard now, so you can reach through, easy access. And yeah, it's a nice setup. So just to wrap up, I would say modern cruising sails, modern distance racing sails, that they really apply to everybody now. So here's a 40-year-old family cruiser, and he's got a modern reaching sail. And then boom, you can say, well, the same technology, the same science is making these kind of fancy things for TP52. So anything is possible now with good design tools and good planning. And so I think for anybody that wants to do the racing on the lake here, you just got to put your hand up and say, this is what I want to do, and then we'll walk you through it. So we've got just a little departure checklist here. And, we have safety, of course. This is the one that we're talking about today, these sail inventory upgrades. How do we fill a couple of gaps? How do we increase safety for the users? And then once we do that, we can work on a chart, make sure everybody knows how to use it and stuff like that. So hopefully you got a few ideas out of this presentation. I'm going to wrap up now, and then Graham, you can start going into the question period.
Okay, thank you, Hugh. Just I'm going to take over sharing the screen for a moment.
Yep.
Just a reminder, we're just going to use the raise your virtual hand in Zoom to go through it. The easiest way is to look for participants and look for raise hand. The raise hand is also in the reactions capability, and you just click on that. We'll flag it and we'll call you in order, and we will ask everybody to remain on mute until then. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll Hugh, can you start sharing again in case anybody has a question on a particular slide? So is
Yes.
anybody got a question they want to ask, please click on the virtual hand.
Share. Yeah.
Nobody has a question?
No questions at all?
We do have one week now from they're beginning to come in there. Jeff, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, I noticed that you've got each of the examples you had of somebody furling either their code 0 or an A sail. They hadn't put up the jib or genoa prior to that. They were. I have furling on an A sail, and I can furl it single-handed without and unfurl it without my genoa up. But once my genoa is up, furling it, often I have trouble, and unfurling it sometimes, but often it's the furling. Is that the recommended way to fly without a foresail while you're doing your furling or unfurling?
No, for sure. If you're in the middle of an activity, whether it's a race or whatever, I mean, you're going to have the sails up. In fact, most of the time you would try and set your code 0 before you even furl up your upwind jib. So if you're having difficulty, it is most likely a friction or an overlap problem at the top. I've seen this on a few cases where the furled code 0 was sort of rubbing into the furled headsail, and all of a sudden it wouldn't unfurl, and so you're trying to pull out the bottom of the sail with the sheet, but the top of the sail is not spinning, and it's an interaction problem up at the top. So that would be my first place that I would look. Modern boats typically have a fairly sizable mast above the forestay, and this is making code 0s great. But a lot of older designs have masthead sail plans, and so we really have to pay close attention to the proximity of the spinnaker halyard coming out of the mast and the top of the forestay. And sometimes modifications are required up there. It's also come to, I think it's logical now that we're using top down more often, that if the proximity of the forestay and the spinnaker halyard are close at the top, we may want the code 0 to be a top down furling sail so that it rolls up tighter at the top right off the bat. And then when you go to unroll, it should also be tighter and have less contact or interaction. Not sure if that helps. Do you still have the J124?
It's a J35.
J35, sorry.
Yeah. And it's it actually works. It's my spinnaker is top down, drilling,
Yeah.
and they're, you just need to have somebody police it. So if I'm with a crew and there's a crew member goes to up to the forestay and watches, everything works pretty well. It's when I'm sailing single-handed and I'm don't have anybody and to monitor it. And sometimes you get well, what happens is the wrap is not getting wrapped over because of the combination between how much load to have on the sheet. If there's too much load, then you can't furl, and if there's not enough load, you get an overwrap sometimes. Like, you know, the sail is overlapping on itself as you furl it.
Yeah, no, I've seen that happen. So I think with a J35, knowing that everything is pretty tightly packed up there at the top of the mast. You know, the design of the mast was all about, you know, reducing weight and windage and all about course racing. And so everything's all jammed into a tight space, and there's not a lot of separation between your spinnaker halyard and the top of the forestay. So, you know, there's a few things we could look at there to try and create more room for the furling. You know, I'd have to get some drawings out to really explore it further, but I think that's the culprit in your case, and it's similar for a lot of people. We have some boats with a fractional rig, but there are spectacles at the hounds, right at the forestay, and the halyard is coming down the mast and going through the spectacle, thereby placing the spinnaker halyard and the forestay together in the same place. So there's really no room for furling there. So in those cases, the solution is just to move the spectacle up, create some distance. In the masthead case, like the J35, it gets a little trickier, but I would say there's choices. One might be to even try and have the general hoist a little bit shorter and get the swivel a little further down. And that may create 2 or 3 inches that you didn't have. I've known some people to modify the top of their mast and actually have a bit of a forward crane to try and get the spinnaker halyard to actually be hanging out 3 inches in front of the forestay. That would also create some room that you don't have right now. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. The crane was the thing I was thinking of. My biggest concern is the loads. If you get too far out in front of the mast, the spinnaker is fully loaded. That's the only problem. I'm not about the physics of that.
Right. Yeah, we'd have to get certainly, you know, guys like Steve Killing could do some engineering work on that for you if you wanted to. Steve's really good at calculating loads and doing the engineering for mast mods.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I accidentally lowered somebody's hand. So if you've raised your hand, please raise it again. If anybody's got any questions. Okay. Again, just if anybody wants to make a point or raise a question, please raise your hand.
Certainly for anybody who's, you know, maybe got a detailed thing they want to get into about their own project, you certainly contact me by email at your convenience, and I'd be happy to work through it. Or maybe you want to go and take some pictures of your setup, and you can send them to me as well. You know, every case is different, so don't be shy. You just got to tell us what you have and ask questions.
Okay, again, I'll call for one last chance for questions. If not, I'd like to thank Hugh for his presentation. We'll be posting the, just a minute. There's a question in chat. Are there good resources for figuring out what you have?
Yeah, so if I understand that question correctly, you want to know what your inventory is right now, and So, sometimes people drop all their sails off and we measure them and then try and determine what you have and what your starting point is. So great example with somebody who just bought a 30-year-old production boat, and now they got to start making some choices. So if they bring in the sails that came with the boat, we measure them up, try and assess them for where they would fit in an inventory, and then talk about what the intended application for the boat and the owner is over the next 3 to 5 years. And that's the starting point of the building of the inventory. So a lot of it can happen before we get to the water. So one of the necessities of our northern climate is that we have to learn how to do a lot of things, even in the wintertime. So, if somebody's not sure what they have, they can drop them off and we can do an inspection and start the process.
Okay, so the response was yes when you started talking about figuring out the inventory. Are there any other questions? Please raise your virtual Zoom hand. If not, thank you very much, everybody. And again, thank you, Hugh, for your presentation. We'll be posting that and sending out the link to the recording. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And we'll be having the last LOOR webinar on March 16th. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. And if you have any questions, you can contact Hugh. His email address is up on the screen. Again, thank you much, everybody.
Thanks, Graham. Thank you all.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll see everybody out in the water racing this summer.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.